Hey gang, Kevin here, Life22, and tonight we have Sonya McCall, incumbent for Ward 4, and we'll be diving into an interview. So let's see. And there we go.
All right. Well, thanks for inviting me, Kevin.
No problem.
So we were having a variety of conversations, so I'm not sure where you want to start, but
So I'd love to jump back into where we started, but I think we probably should start fresh, right? So I think you took over my alma mater. What was that? 2021, right?
going in, yeah, this is my third year. I'll finish up. So yeah.
Or third
Well,
third term.
Yeah, no, second
Term,
yeah,
third year.
I'm
Okay.
finishing up my second term.
Okay. And so yeah, because I stepped down in 21, and then they did a whole bunch of fills, right?
Yep.
And they have So, that's 2021. So then you took So then you ran and won in November of 21 and got in 22, right?
Yes.
So that would. Okay. Yep. And then so you'll take office again in 26.
Hopefully.
And then so. I haven't kept up on the current. I probably should call the Board of Elections and get the numbers. So, is there anybody running against you?
Yes, there
Okay.
is a Republican challenger, and
Okay.
so I'm hopeful that the residents. I mean, I know they see me out and about, and I'm responsive to them. So I'm hoping that they see that I'm doing a good job, and that they, that I think I have their trust, and really working to make sure I maintain that.
Right.
So that come November, hopefully, I'll be the alderman in Ward 4 again.
Okay. Yeah. I was gonna say my wife said that. Was it Jason Peters? Jason.
Alan Peters, I think.
Alan Peters. Yeah, I always screw because his dad's Alan Peters.
Oh.
And so I think he goes by Jason, which is his middle name.
Oh, could be.
So, but she said he stopped by the house and he was running for alderman. But it was like a few days before deadline, so you
Yes.
never know, right? Yep. But then again, an alderman race is easier than if he decided to run for mayor at the 11th hour. That's 160 signatures. That's a tall order in a couple days.
Yeah, and my theory is I go out. I mean, the way that Linda was such a formidable opponent there, right? Like, I worked hard and I went to everybody's house practically, and so I think that people know me. And that's how I got my signatures. I didn't sit at home calling. I went out and I just went to people's houses, and it takes me quite a long time to get signatures, not because people aren't willing to sign, but because people want to talk, right? And
right, or they're not home.
Well,
and then you
not home.
And then you got to come back to the neighborhood. That's my.
Yeah, and I'm cool with that, but I think just going around and people really want to talk. They want to talk about what's going on here. They want to talk about what's going on there. And that's really what we're in office for, is to be able to, help people to, I think sometimes people don't understand. When I ran the first time, people would tell me all the time they didn't know what an alderman was.
Right.
So trying to help them understand what an alderman is versus what the mayor is, what the job responsibilities is.
Right.
And I think that's a challenge. And I think we're going to, with the charter reform, if it passes, just go with the idea of councilman. Because I think people say, well, I know who my alderman is, but who's my councilman?
Right, and there's still a disconnect, right? And anything, that's the PR, I know that people have been criticizing, PR, that the city, the council, everybody kind of gives out, right? There is no real PR division. Right? So, how do you use a roundabout, right? You get all the Pennsylvania people coming in, and then, the city tries. I think what the city released a couple videos last few years, what the water plan is, what the sewer plan is, when I think Mary George may have spearheaded it when she was still there for the roundabouts, and they had somebody driving the roundabouts and kind of explaining what you should do. And so, I mean, they do things like that, but it's what's the reach?
Yeah.
Because what is it? A lie travels around the world before the truth gets its shoes on.
Absolutely. And I think that we need to do more of that. I'm all for transparency, and I truly appreciate that Alderman Robinson goes home, he types up kind of what happened, and honestly, I was kind of thinking of that, and then when I was reading his, I'm like, I don't want to just copy him, so I'm like, you know what? I'll direct him to there, or I'll ask him, because he does an amazing job of just putting down his thoughts right when he gets home, kind of here, and really it's just facts. It's not even his thoughts. It's here were the PLs, here's what happened.
Sure.
Here's what we voted on. So, and I think just trying to put that up on my alderman site, and
or even
make
just
sure.
sharing it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Just, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. So people know kind of what's going on, because I think, boy, I'd love it if people came more consistently. They've been coming recently, but more consistently
Sure.
to the council meetings, or watched them on video. But I go back and I look on YouTube, and we don't have that many things, and I don't think that everybody also knows, because I tell them all the time, you can go on YouTube and you can see this, and I try to put up links occasionally so that
Right.
they know
There's
where
not.
it is.
Yeah. There's not a lot of people that like. I think I've talked about this on my show where I like. This is my football. Like politics is my thing, and so it's like I can't expect Joe, even like aldermen. Like I'm sure all the aldermen don't pay attention to all the county news. Like it's what I mean. Like you've got a job, and like that's like this is my hobby. So I love to just like I'll follow the county races. I'll follow this. I'll follow that. I'll go down such a rabbit hole with some of this stuff that like I can't expect the general public or even people that are slightly less involved. Like you guys are involved in the city business, so you guys got the city kind of wrapped up. But it's like, what exactly is the county doing? You know what I mean? Like you might not follow it as much as a county legislator would, but I wouldn't expect them to follow the city as
Yeah,
much as.
yeah.
And
Well, and you did a great job, and I commented on it. You had done a great job kind of delineating um, mayor stuff, alderman stuff.
right,
That was a few weeks ago. But you just did, and I think that that's helpful to inform the public,
right,
because everybody tunes into something a little different. Everybody has a little more taste. So it's, how do we, get the word out and capture to the largest group? Because I think one of the things we're challenged by in the city, and people say, well, I didn't know that. Well, it was on the city website. Well, we sent it out in a water, bill.
yeah.
But how do we?
Some people don't get their water bill because they rent and the landlord gets it,
Right.
or
And so how do we get?
who looks at the back of their
out.
bill for the sweeper schedule,
Yeah.
right? Like they look at their bill and like, how am I going to pay this? They don't want to flip it over and be like, oh, I could also be fined if I'm parked on the street on Thursdays every other
Yeah.
week, like.
Or
So.
that I could, one of the ways we could do a cost savings is if more people signed up to just have their bill electronic, so that we spend like $3,000 a month just sending out bills and
Right.
different things,
Oh,
right?
yeah.
So I look for how's there cost savings, and at this point in time with being able to get things digitally, yeah, how do we save money? And it might seem like, well, in the budget, in a 20 million budget, or actually by the time we put everything together it's like 29, but 3,000 a month builds up, and if you put that with something else, right? So how do we get the word out that you can do those things, and how can we do it more efficiently and more effectively so that people know more? I mean, I think not everybody wants to, like, you might listen to the hour or the 2 hours of the council meeting, right?
Right, but I'm sure the IT guys can show you if you were to go to the city page. It's the same as mine. I can show, peak viewership. Like the average viewer listens for 3 minutes on a 10-minute podcast, and then it's like, okay, on a 3-hour one, the average person might listen to 15 minutes, and so it's like, yikes. But you still have people. It'll like you'll have one
Yeah.
person listen to the whole thing. One person listen to 3/4. And they'll show you all that, and then they'll even show you peak times, like right in
Cool.
this part of the video is the peak, like this is when people really liked it. And I'm sure like the most recent council meetings, I'm sure if you go to the public comment section, it's like right up there, like any of the most hot topic, the stuff that the news is going to push, right? It's going to be all those, you're going to see those trends right there is where people are watching it and whatnot. So
Yeah, and I think that we have to be more cognizant of utilizing the tools that are out there to be able to figure out these things and say,
Right.
how do we reach it? Because I think that is one of the things that we hear consistently is, well, I didn't know. And they're like, well, it was in the newspaper, and we already know, the newspaper has a dwindling population that reads it and physically gets it. It's even less.
oh yeah,
Right? And so some of the things that we have to do, we have to publish. And I've been advocating, if we have to publish, what does that mean? What can we change it to in terms of publishing?
Sure.
Because if we publish it, and listen, Times Herald is doing their job. Local news is really important in getting the news out.
Right.
But how do we publish it so that most people see it, so they know, or that they know that there's we just had 2 public meetings to be able to talk about things like tax cap and sewer or water rates. No one spoke at the public hearing.
right. Oh
Right.
yeah, it's always
And-
just smack. Anybody here to speak on that? Nope. Smack the gavel. You wait your
Yeah, yes.
pre-generated 5 minutes. I don't even think there's a number on that
There was this time. So the poor people were probably like, "Why are you waiting?" Well, because it was set at 6.
It was
6:05.
published and it's legally yep. When I was there, Tiffany would set them all like I think she set them all at the same time. Or at least with the committee meetings.
Yes, with the committee meetings.
She would set them all at 6:00. So it's like then you could pick and choose. Well, we can't start finance because finance isn't on until 6:30 or 6:15 or 6:05 and so you had to like kind of follow we can wait 5 minutes. We can start that one and then we'll just bang out all and it was like.
Yeah. So with the public hearing, I guess it's and it I think that people honestly this time around with the budget I didn't it was my second or third year as finance chair. I guess it was my third. And so I feel like I learn more each time, right?
Oh yeah. There's definitely a learning curve. I don't like 2 years like I guess cuz it's not I don't want this to come out weird, but it's not hard to win alderman. So it's like 2-year term, but like you don't like I was still learning in year 5. Right? Like and it's like but what do you do about it? Like
yeah. And I had somebody say, "Oh, after 3 months I was kind of up and running." I'm thinking, how in the world is that possible? Because then you're like first you got to like there's you get some information but
and then some of it's wrong.
I got this handbook but figuring out how do you put in a PL, what's the chain of command in terms of communication, all of those things I feel it does. And so I think that this time I really had a much better handle on it. And when I talk to people about the budget, I think people were more understanding this time about the tax increase. And I think that I've tried to educate people about, if 76 or 75% of our city budget during the general fund is related to salaries and fringe benefit.
Sure.
I mean, for every salary there's 55% of fringe benefit. That doesn't leave a lot for everything else.
Right, yeah. And then the cost of everything else goes up.
Yes, and there were many years in which there was 0%, 1% in terms of increase. And,
sure.
And that kind of put us to where we are now.
And I remember being on COVID and it's like, and the consensus was everyone was like in panic mode. Like I remember we did a 0%. I think that was the first time we ever did it 0%. I was kind of just like following the wave, like, hey, keep it under the tax cap. People don't. It's the third rail of politics. You don't want to raise taxes because they'll come out and get you. Yeah. When you guys when the paper wrote an article saying like 6%, like I got a call from Nate Smith and he was like, you remember being on the council and if we went over the tax cap, there was like pitchforks and lynch mobs like looking for us, and it was like I was like I remember it was
well, and that is the challenge because if we look over the last 15 years, I mean the average was 1.3% for those 15 years, I think it is, of increase of tax.
What's inflation?
Yeah, right.
It used to be 1.5%. Now it's 2%, 2.5%.
And when we're talking about salaries going up, and everybody knows who has health insurance going up, and we look at retirement, so the city pays out all of that,
right?
And 2% can't keep at it. And look, I'd love to be at 2%. I'd love to be. Would that look good in terms of Sonya getting reelected? Sure, but that would do the city no good.
Exactly. Sometimes you're like, if you don't punish your kids will love you. The problem is in the future, like if you don't discipline your kids become monsters, and then it's like, well now they're monsters. Like they can't love you. You know what I mean? It's like one of those. It's very difficult. Like you don't want to discipline your kids. You want to be their best friend, but at the same time, you have to do what's necessary to fulfill the role.
Yeah, because if we don't this year, then next year it's just going to be worse. And whether it's me or somebody else sitting in that seat, is going to have a much higher tax rate because there was, do I have some concerns about the budget and we should have some concerns about the budget, like we put in there $104,000, the mayor put in his budget $104,000 for the downtown QR code.
Is it for the parking?
Parking.
Yeah, okay.
But here's the deal, and I went around and I talked to the business owners to see what they thought and stuff. And if we're going to go with that, and we go to other places and they have it and they're successful with it, but it has to be the amount of money we'll make has to be worth the pain
of doing
that
it.
residents will go through, right?
Sure.
If we're going to make 50,000, I don't think 50,000 is enough to make on it to put our residents through that amount of pain. So I know that theoretically that $104,000 may not be there, you
Right.
know. And on the same token, in last year's budget, there were things like, you know, $70,000 was somehow they were able to come up with when they went and purchased trucks that were more, or vehicles that were more costly than they had come to the council for.
Right.
You know, and they found money to pay for the buyout for the insurance that somehow had not got factored into the budget last year. So I know that there's some wiggle room there, even though we're told like, okay, this is as lean as
There's
possible.
definitely, there's definitely been financial hiccups over the years.
Yeah, right. So we have to make sure that, you know, I want to be a good steward of people's money. You
Sure.
know, I want to make sure that we don't want to price anyone out of Olean, you know, and I don't want to be down the road though, leaving it to somebody else, whether Dunkirk and it's 84% or Buffalo that's
Right.
50 million in the hole with theirs. The fact that we last year or this year we're not going to make the sales tax, you know, that put us almost $1 million in the hole. So, you know, when Alderman Crawford and I went to the mayor, it was like we've got to halt things right now.
Sure.
Because how are we going to make up that? Our general fund is only $1.8 million. If you think about that, that's not much.
And isn't it 1.8 million waiting with like an IOU in the cookie jar from the state for the Oates buses?
Yeah.
So it's really like $0.8 million to kind of be working capital, right? Because that's something I was talking about with Amy, and I like, obviously she's not in it, so she's not there yet, so she doesn't know like how the different funds work. And I was kind of explaining that to her in the show, and it was like, when you don't, your general fund isn't a savings account which has tons of money in it. It's just like that $1.8 million is spread out over here, and where this employee group get their paychecks from, and where over here where they're paying out workers' comp insurance and, you know, property insurance, casualty, whatever else. Like, they have all these little like bank accounts with money in them, and that makes up the 1.8. You know what I mean? And then some of it, that 1.8 is like, well, the state owes us 1, or we have grant money coming in a big check, but we also were floating it for 3 years. You know, you got to float the whole project in your bond or ban or whatever it is, and then you get reimbursed. And it's like there's a lot of working capital. You almost need that $2-3 million reserve to have working capital to run it. It's like a business.
Well, and you do, and you know, also thinking about, you know, what happens if we had an immediate need, right? The goal is to have 15% of your budget. That's
Right.
what the city has down in the water fund, in the sewer fund. In the sewer fund, we're good. We got about $3 million in there. The water fund, we're significantly below that. And then in the general fund, we're nowhere near 15%, which is what we want to have in there in case we need it.
Right. And I would want to keep building that sewer, especially with all the other, you know, the DEC consent orders, you know, with everyone coming to the council with complaints about our sewer and infrastructure. It's like,
yeah, and I went with the mayor and Brad Camp, who was over the superintendent of sewer and water, to meet with President Seneca and the other council members, and you know, I'm hopeful to continue to work on that with everybody, because I think that, you know, we can say, oh well, it's X amount and this and that, but the reality is that any is not okay. And the problem is that when we have the heavy rain, that then it bypasses so that it doesn't back up into people's basements, which nobody here wants it backing up into their basements.
Right, so you got to have something that can handle the flow.
Yes.
You got to send it somewhere.
Yes.
But I think that there is still a lot of PR. Like, you know, if you talk to anybody, like, you know, my uncle used to work for the DEC, so I know a ton of those guys, and I'm sure like they can explain to you, like, when poop hits the river, like by the time it gets down to the nation, to Salamanca, like, you're not, like, these people come to the council and say, hey, I saw toilet paper floating. It's like, did you? because that stuff all kind of degrades. Like that, most of that stuff doesn't even look like toilet paper when it leaves your house. Like it hits the main sewer, so by the time it gets anywhere, and then it hits that pump station, like it's, you know what I mean? Like I think that a PR thing there is definitely was lacking. You know.
Well, and I think transparency. You know, one of the things that we had asked is of the mayor and of sewer and water is on the city website. You know, put what we're doing in real time so
Sure.
people can see not just historically what we've spent, but what our project is. What is our plan? Not just the 2016 plan, but what is our plan to rectify it? Because you know, we also don't want anything backing up into residents' basements,
Sure.
right?
Yeah.
So, I mean, there's the potential for that too if it doesn't bypass into the
Or
the
if
river.
it, yeah, right, and or if it's taking too much, right?
Absolutely.
And so like we don't have a flow meter on that, so like there's nothing that the same way you don't have one on your house, right? Like you have a
Yeah.
meter for water coming in, they just assume water in, water out. So they say,
Yes.
you know, so to have a like some sort of like they just kind of take a best guess. The size of the pipe is this, the amount of rainfall was this. If the pipe was completely to the brim and like flowing at this velocity, how many gallons? How long was the rainfall for? It's really like a wag, right? It's
Yeah, and the challenge is, you know, and this predates you and I on the council, is that, you know, in 2002, they had the survey done.
right,
You know, then they came back and they identified all these issues with storm basins, with homes and businesses being tied into the sewer. Not a whole lot was done on it.
right.
Right. And then, you know, we kind of inherited that. And then, you know, they wanted to do another study. But I'm like, and we eventually, well, what happened is nobody really, the RFP went out, nobody was like,
Bid
hey,
on it.
right?
Yeah.
So we said, you know, and I was like, well, why would we have another study
Just update the
and
one we
spend
have.
$100,000 when we didn't do what's in the first one? Why don't we go back and take a look and look at those storm basins and say, okay, what part is the city's? If the city kind of disconnects from the storm basins, you know, what's left? And then we go through and we look at the businesses, we look at the homes. They did the smoke testing. Why would we repeat the same thing, right? So I'm about let's
Because if
not,
the work was done, you can verify it. You
Yeah.
can go there and be like, hey, we've got 6 problems in this street. Oh, 3 of them were handled? Good, we just have 3 to deal with.
So I said, go out, take X amount per, you know, per
Right.
month, right? Let codes go out, look at the houses and stuff. I mean, we would be way further if we had just kind of done that piece.
Because I remember that was part of the reason we passed like the landlord rental inspection, because it allowed codes to go in and then and at the point of selling houses. Like so when you the infiltration, I always forget what INI or I, it's whatever it is. It's the infiltration of stormwater and whatever, making sure that people's
Yes.
gutters aren't tied in.
Yes, yes.
And I don't know how, because I don't know if that's actually like was implemented, but that was the discussion. We're going to implement this because of this, you know, to make sure that rentals are safe and to make sure that house sales have something from the city saying like, hey, we walk through them, and then it allowed us to satisfy the consent decree with the DEC. But I don't know how many times that's actually like, I don't know if that was, because then when we did the rental inspection, they came back to the council with this is what our checklist is for rentals, but I never saw one that was for the housing inspection.
Yeah.
And so I don't know if like maybe there's a loss in communication between what was passed and the intent of it and what's actually being done. So I'm not going to fault anybody, but there's government for you.
Yeah, and I think that that's a good thing to go back and revisit, because when we looked at rentals, you know, I go out, I'm a home health nurse, I go out and I see the apartments and I see
Right.
some really deplorable things that nobody should really be living in, you know. And so one of the push I want to have safe, affordable housing for people, and that means that we as a city have to make sure that landlords are accountable.
Right.
You know, nobody wants to live next to the house that is full of cockroaches, and I get calls on that, you know.
Right.
Or, you know, I worked with residents on one of the streets because there was a house that it was in deplorable condition. Though actually the woman living there with her children had called me and said, you know, look, this is what's going on in this house. And I went up and I looked at it, I took pictures and I went to codes and I'm like, hey, you know, and they're like, and there's drug dealing coming out of it. And ultimately that house, isn't occupied now. There were some arrests made because, I always say codes know I'm going to go and look at the apartment. So if somebody is saying, hey, this is it, I'm going to go look at it. But the other thing is, we should be having those. And now it's on a, I would have preferred like a 3-year, it's on a 5-year plan. So that if you've rented your apartment for 10 years, it wouldn't have gotten
Did that change?
We just did it beginning of the year, in that ballpark, end of last year, I think.
Okay.
So
I
if
must
you
have missed that one.
Yeah, if you have an apartment that you've lived in for 10 years, guess what? If you're not moving, nobody was looking at it.
Sure.
Right?
And that was the big put on the brakes. I know that like Tiffany's predecessor, she gave us a lot of like flack about it. I don't want you coming into my apartment. I rented the apartment. If you inspected it before I came in, that's fine. I live here. I have an expectation of privacy, and we got a lot of that. So that's why we did it upon. And so like, but that's just like any law, right? You pass it, and then you renegotiate for the other things that are going to work better. You mentioned they were going to work better, but no one wanted. They wanted to see how it would work at first.
Well, and the problem there is, it was incumbent upon the landlords to call codes, let them know, like, hey, my person moved out. So I started hearing things like, you know what, so and so, this landlord is moving people in the middle of the night. This person, like, I'm pretty sure there was no inspection, Sonya, because this day they moved out, this day somebody moved in. So we have a lot of really.
I know they were using water bills. They were using water. So if you come in to change water, but if you're like, I'm a landlord who keeps water in my name. I don't want to deal with the headache. I don't want surprises. I don't want to have, we can only send the water bill to the tenant or you. You can't, like, I could get the email, but the tenant got the paper copy. Like, they didn't have it set up properly. And so I was like, no, I'll just keep all the water in my name. And then I don't, like, because if you also have a tenant switch in the middle of a month, then you get a double bill. And so it's like, I'm paying a minimum, the tenant's paying a minimum, the tenant says, screw you, I'm moving out. And, like, I'm not paying that bill. And so then it goes back on my taxes. I pay 2 bills. It's like, I'd rather just pay it, know it's paid, so I don't get some big surprise. It's all going on my taxes at the end of the year.
Yeah.
So, but I'm also one to call the guys down in codes and be like, hey, I got an apartment that's just got rented. Like,
And there's a lot of good landlords like you that do that. But unfortunately.
Oh, there's a ton that don't. Oh,
right?
And
And so the ones whose properties are not in good shape, they're not going to call codes. And those are the ones that actually are at risk for our residents, So that's
why people don't like their doctors that speak up. Like, hey, you know what? Maybe you should exercise a little bit more. Nobody wants to hear that, right? Like, do you want to call the apartment doctor in to tell you what's wrong with your apartment, or since the money's coming in, let's just.
Right.
And that's the philosophy.
Absolutely. And so I think that I had certainly seen enough and called out enough times to have that I would have liked it to be 3 years. We went with 5, but if there were other circumstances, then we can take a look at, if it's a concern and there's 5 apartments in one, then we can look at all 5. And I think, that we just have to be consistent in doing that, so we're not targeting any landlord.
Sure.
But I agree. I think that a lot of the landlords just figured, it's easier just to do the water myself. And I think a fair amount of landlords went with that, which meant then that you weren't getting those triggers that were like, hey.
Somebody moved out, somebody moved in. Oh, hey, deed change or whatever. And like the code guys are pretty like good about it. Like I just got to meet a couple. They just bought a place in Olean and they dropped $15,000 on electrical service, and they went with another contractor for heating, and they're looking to have it sided, and they've got nice tenants moving in, and then they got a letter because yours truly pulled a permit for the electrical, and it sparked hey, we have to update our records because this is a new owner, and then we need to know who your local contact is, and we need to. If you're renting it, you need to get it inspected. And I think the girl was moving in the same day, and codes work with them because they're like, you're out of town, you don't know. But hey, we want to let you know that this is something that's required. And now they're, and now they call me like every other day asking me questions about like all the different things. They're like, oh, you're very knowledgeable. Who can you recommend for a roof? Who can you recommend for siding? How about blown in insulation? And it's one of those things. It's like, but like at least codes was able to work with them, and they have little things that trigger and say, okay, you need a housing inspection, you need the rental inspection, you need to have this landlord form on file, so we know who to call in case it's 11 o'clock at night and you're
Yes.
more than 20 miles away.
Yeah,
Which somehow I got lumped on that for.
Right,
So.
absolutely. With those things too, that vacant landlords or people who live, out of state and stuff have been a challenge. Banks who own houses have been a challenge,
Oh, yeah.
right? So, we have to have a vehicle to, I had a woman call me, one of the Ward 4 residents, and she's like, look, I spent all this money working on this house, making it nice, trying to sell it, and this house next to me, this is it. So I went up, I looked at it, took pictures and stuff, and codes worked with them in a bank. It was with the bank to
Sure.
say, look, these things have to be done because this has to be, up to code, because
Sure.
it's not fair to the person who bought a home with the idea of, you know what, I'm going to fix it up, I'm going to resell it, and then the house next door is like, do you really want that house?
Sure, right. And that's why I've ended up buying all the houses around me. But not everybody has that like ambition. Some people just want to live in their home, and then maybe their job switches and they move and they want to sell their house, and well, the dumpy rental next door just got dumpier, and
Yeah, and I think that a few people have done that when things have come up for auction to say, do I want the house or do I just want to
bulldoze it.
Yeah, right. And kudos to them. And I think the city's tried to work with people too, that if there's something or there's a small lot or there's something there to say.
Yeah, the land bank would sell it to you for $1 sometimes.
Yeah.
Like,
but then making sure that they're on top of it and fixing it up and not just letting it
sure.
kinda.
Oh, I meant like if they tear it down.
Oh,
Like,
yeah.
And so I've had to get them in touch with some people before too, because like I have friends at the county, and I'll be like, oh, hey, you live in this neighborhood. There was actually a lot down on the hill,
Ah.
and they tore down that huge. It was a Linda Bartlett firehouse.
Oh.
Yeah, and I think it scorched the neighbor's house, which was another one of hers, and well, there was a lady that lived in between, and so I want to say I think they even were about to demo the next house over. So I went to the lady who lived in between, and I was like, reach out to the county. They're looking to unload this lot. And I don't know if she ever did. I think it was like, listen, if you get it for $1, I'm pretty sure vacant land title change is like $350. Like you might have to pay those fees, but for $350, you got a nice, huge lot.
Yeah.
And I don't think anybody ever bought it. I'd have to check the tax rolls. But it's been a couple years. But it's like anytime I have the opportunity to see a lot or I see a land bank sign, usually I'll make a call and be like, I know the neighbor. I can get you in touch with him if you haven't already. And sometimes that's just helpful. It's just, but they'll sell them to you for $1, and hey, $1 keeps them on the tax rolls because now you're paying $200 a year.
Yep, absolutely, and trying to make sure that people know those things, or that there's a program for rehabbing, and how do individuals know, because we don't want to penalize people for making improvements, and I think that people will tell me that too, and I think the city's not going out and doing a reassessment because one of the cost in part, but people feel like, oh,
$50,000 a year because it's going to be $300,000, some crazy number.
Right, it is, right, and so people worry like, well, if I put siding on, well, only if you have your house reappraised,
Right, and that only is to the bank or you who's paying for it. Like,
it's because the city hasn't.
Who wants to send that to the city? Like, oh, my house was appraised for $300,000. Well, don't send that to the city, because.
Well, and I don't know how that piece works, but no, just make. We want people to do that. It's like I love the sidewalk program. It wasn't utilized as much as it could be, but before I was on the council, my husband had found out about it, and we ended up doing 20 blocks because we have that big long sidewalk on the corner, right?
Corner lots, yeah.
Welcome to my world, right?
Right, yeah.
And it was great. Now we decided to do 20 blocks. I mean, basically, I think that paid for not even 10, but cool. It was helpful for us.
Right, because it also gets cheaper when you have the contractor there. Because if they have to come and do 2 blocks, there's a minimum like. I gotta send my guys out. I gotta set up. Like it's
and
like
who
if
wants
I do
to
your
do
whole
2 blocks?
Right, who wants to do 2 blocks? Like so you get a discount by having them go there and hey, it took an extra day and I just put an extra grand in your pocket, and it's like hey, that's a win. That's worth it.
Absolutely, and that was kind of where we started, right? With about people knowing that about the sidewalk program and the fact that the city has to pay prevailing wage is kind of where we were just about when we got online. And that is, so if you are going to take advantage of the sidewalk program, if you have your own contractor, you can get more blocks.
Right.
If you go with the city contractor, the city's paying prevailing wage, which is significantly more, so you're getting less bang for your buck. You're getting less service for your dollars.
and then those guys got to pay their guys, and it's like, and I've talked to a few contractors in the area that are like, they don't mind coming and helping the city out, but it like sometimes it rubs everybody the wrong way, because like the business owner doesn't see any more money by paying his guys prevailing wage.
Right, right.
If anything, it creates like, well, when can we get more of those jobs? When can we get more of those jobs? And it's like, it costs a lot of money because there's a benefit package, and then you're competing with other people. You have to up your insurances. There's all these like risks that you take on as a business owner, and then you might not get all the jobs, or the city doesn't have that many jobs for you to do. So it's like, and it creates this little animosity where these guys are like, oh, I want rate work. You know what I mean? And it kind of like, it builds this like, I don't know, it kind of takes away from the camaraderie if you've got a good work team.
Yeah, and it's the same thing with the tree program.
Right.
Which the whole thing about subways and the trees for me is kind of, I think that's such a hard thing for landowners, because we say,
because you own it.
You own it. You got to take care of it, but you can't do anything on it unless the city kind of
it tells you so. Right. It's
you can't park on it. You can't concrete it over. You can't blacktop it. You can't plant.
You can't even plant a flower box. There was a lady on, was it right on the south side of the ward. Mm-hmm. She used to, right on 6th and Henley. She used to plant flower boxes.
Yes.
And Codes would leave her alone when EJ was there, because he's like, well, it looks nice. And then, you know, obviously EJ left, and it was like, yeah, but it doesn't meet code. And so like, you can't discriminate against somebody because they made it look nicer, which is it's sad, but at the same time it's like, well, but if my place looks like garbage, like, who are you to say that that looks nicer? Yes. And that's where it comes in. So it's like,
and because you have to be consistent.
Yes.
Right? There's fair and consistent, right? So fair is letting that stay there. Consistent means somebody else puts something out that looks horrible, and you got to be like, okay, you get to
your cinder block yard art is a tripping hazard.
Like, there you go, right? So with the trees, it's the same thing, though. You know, if you have somebody take down your tree, it's going to be less cost than if it's prevailing wage, and the city has their contractors
their arborists
come and do it, right? Yeah. And you know, and it's hard, because that's probably one of the things I've heard most about is, you know, Sonya, look, I asked them to look at my tree. I mean, somebody sent me, it was all hollowed out. And
then what happened was they shot themselves in the foot, because they realized that they just tattled on themselves, because they didn't realize it was their responsibility.
And they took the tree down. They got the city's approval, and you got to get the city's approval to take it down. And, you know, and unfortunately, I think the city planted some trees that were not trees that should be planted where they were. Sure. And you know what happens is we see it buckling the sidewalks then, or buckling the blacktop, and that's a challenge. So I do think the city has responsibility in those pieces, and trying to, you know, how do I advocate best for the residents who come to me that say, look, I asked for this to be down before, and now they're telling me it's got to come down, but I asked 3 years to have it down. You know?
Right. Yeah.
I say, well, find the documentation. You show me. I'll go advocate for you.
Right.
You know?
I was one of the first ones to pull a permit, because it was like, you're responsible. And I said, okay. So I went down after a council meeting. I went down, and they were like, we need to have a tree contractor remove it. And they had no idea either, because it just came down from the council. And there's a disconnect, because not all those PLs get to where they have to go. Sometimes sometimes there's a procedure, and sometimes if it's new, it doesn't have a place to go. So I remember walking in and talking to the girls in DPW and saying, what do I do to remove these 2 trees in front of my house? They're like, oh, just get a contractor. So I called my insurance company. I said, hey, I need to add a rider. I need to be a tree contractor. How much tree work are you going to do? I'm like, if you have to put a number down, I don't know, like $1, because I'm doing it only at my places. I'm not doing it for anybody else. It's just me. And so they were like, okay, there's going to be no extra cost, but you know, like, you're only doing property you own. And so they put all these like limits on it, so I wouldn't go out and be a tree contractor for other people, but I was for me. So I'm like, I'm a tree contractor. Here's the rider. And I went and I took out the 2 trees, and it was like when Sue Cooper was still alive.
Oh, yeah.
And she called the mayor flipping out. Alderman Doherty took out those 2 young 17-year-old oak trees in front of his house, and you would have thought I drove by and pulled a gun out in front of the school or something. Like, I mowed 2 kids down outside of graduation. It was like, that's how she like conveyed it. Like, she loved her trees.
You have to get approval for it, and so that's
they didn't have that in the. They didn't know any of that, and then they finally came out with, here's our protocol. They sat down with the mayor, the council, And like it just took me. I was like, well, I mean, if that tree's my responsibility, if all the trees on my subway are my responsibility,
Yeah.
I'm gonna take them all out. And that's what sparked the actual protocol that you have to get permission from the council. You can't just.
Well, if it's in the subway, like
Right.
we had a big
Sure.
pine tree right in our yard, and we had that taken down. Go for it. Go
Right.
take care of it, right? And the city's not going to pay half of that either. But the tree has to be deemed to be not salvageable in terms of it.
Sure.
It really needs to come down, or it's a safety hazard. And we have beautiful trees, but we have trees like in Oak Hill Park that are really old that and there's a couple in Franchot that I've noted that they're dead, right?
Right.
So they become safety hazards.
I was just saying
that
that was always a gripe for me, because like one of the last things I did on the council was we authorized $45,000. It was me, and I think seconded by Dave Anastasia. He had a couple trees at Boardman Park, not Boardmanville. Boardmanville is in Ward 1.
Mm-hmm.
I think Boardman Park is right across from the AKT and right there on
Oh,
the
yeah,
extension. Yeah, so in Boardman Park, there was like a couple trees that needed to come down, and in Oak Hill had a ton of them.
Mm-hmm.
And so we authorized. Sue Cooper had put a package together. She goes, I have, under our current thing, I've worked with a contractor, and that's why she was so awesome, because she would reach out to National Grid and she'd get them to do extra stuff.
Yeah.
And then it's like, now she's gone, and now that guy who, like, I'm pretty sure one of the people that she was dealing with had retired. And so it's like, now we really are very limited on like what we can pull, because that position's not there. But we'd earmarked $45,000, and I remember then I'd step down, and every time I turn around, I would hear about a windstorm taking dead trees down at Oak Hill Park. I'm like, what happened to the money? What happened to the money? And I think there was always been a disconnect where you, like, if the council earmarks something, you don't have to move it into a separate fund. Like, if you just say, we're authorizing this money to be used for this purpose, I think there's sometimes is a disconnect with the implementation on, like, well, okay, so we're going to move the funds over to the emergency tree removal fund. And then the people that are using that, utilizing, living in and out of that fund through their, through the course of the year, whatever, depending on what their position is, I don't think they see the notes attached. And I think that becomes an issue. Like, because like if you earmark something in the general fund, like that's what it's for. You don't get to take it for something else.
Theoretically.
Right. But then the money goes. Then it's like, well, we had another storm, and we had this, or we had that, or it rolled to the general fund, and now it's gone. It's like, but it was earmarked for this.
Yes, and so we have been trying to do capital projects to prevent that from happening, because we put in last year, I don't know, I think it was $100,000+ to take down the ash trees that we need to.
Right.
And then we kept saying, well, what's up with the program? Like, did we take them down? How many are left? How much money is left in the fund? Because we didn't hear anything. And so there's like $40,000 left in it. And we need to go through and say, how many ash trees do we need to take down? So we don't endanger other trees too, right?
Sure.
So that's one of the things that we had set up, because
sometimes you also fall in between seasons. You're like, hey, we need to take all these trees out, and you're coming right up on the budget end. Yep. And all that money will disappear if it's out of a capital fund.
Yes, so that's why we've tried to put things into a capital fund, because then it's earmarked there.
Sure.
And we can go there and we can say, versus if it's just a line item and at the end of the year.
Right. Where to go? It just rolled into the general.
It rolled into the general.
And they take all the little sticky notes off of it, and they say, okay, here's general fund money. And it's like, where's my sticky notes? Oh, they're in the trash because they were last year's sticky notes. Like,
yeah, right. So that's what we've tried to be.
And most of the sticky note stuff, that's I have to clarify. So it's there's nobody that's actually pulling sticky notes off. It is just how the law works with how it rolls to the general fund. So, but yeah, any earmarks you have, I believe they automatically dissolve. Like, that money is not still earmarked into the general fund.
Unless we ask to encumber it, which means to hold it over to the next year to add to it.
Right, and the easy way for the council to do this is at a capital fund, which is like kind of
the
sunsets on Earth, but like these capital funds are like little moons outside of the orbit. So.
That are untouchable except for those things.
Right.
And so we've tried to do that more consistently so that we can have, so that we know, right, that it's there, and that's what it's going to be used for, not because there's not enough money in this line item.
Sure.
because within the general fund, line items, get adjusted, but, we need to be mindful if we want something earmarked, then we have to put it. Because one of the things that drives me a little bit batty is there's no comprehensive plans for things. Like, I think like vehicles, right? Like, there should be like a comprehensive plan for how we're going to
replace
yeah,
vehicles.
versus like last year it was like, okay, we need $200,000 for this, and then then this ran over by $70,000. Well, how is it we needed all those at one time instead of saying, we're going to replace four at a time, right?
But and there's like 28 vehicles or something.
And
you don't want them to get beyond like 5 to 7 years.
And
so.
we have way more than 28 vehicles.
Oh, is it? Okay.
Right? And my thing is, can we share these vehicles, right? For cost savings, can DPW share with parks, and how do we share things so that we don't need that? Or if we have a big truck that we need, can we share that with the town of Olean or with the school?
Sure.
Even things like the city garage. We need a new city garage. We need a new
right.
city garage.
They showed me that at first, and I gave them some advice when I was first on the council, and I think it was under the Windus administration for the DPW, and he was like, "This thing needs to be." I was like, "Listen, like the same thing I told Tom Windus. What you need some kind of general maintenance crew to come in here, tuck point it, give the building a pressure wash, a paint job. You know what I mean? Like you can spruce that up, because they were talking about, the brick is crumbling. It's like cinder block, dude. You got to general maintenance. Like that's things that need to be done. But there is no masons for the city.
Right.
And I was like, I'm like that. And then if you have to pay prevailing wage, that's when I started learning about prevailing wage, was because of that.
Yeah.
And, I mean, it's one of those things. Like my first year on the city, like I looked at the city roof or the city garage roof, and there was like 22 roof leaks. In a 4-hour afternoon, I had patched all, and 3 came back. So we're down to like 3 of them, and it's like I need a little bit more than what they're, and it's one of those things. It's like, okay, the roof's still, there's asbestos in the building. There's all these little things that like you have to worry about, because I know the most recent DPW directors, like every time I see it on the council meetings, I'm listening to it, and I'm like, he's like, what do we do with this building?
I said, come to us with a comprehensive plan for what you want to do with it, versus thinking the council's not going to do that. Ours is about policy and where is the money. But we need the experts to come to us and say, here's either a plan to fix it, or the salt shed, right? Here's a plan to fix it.
Sure.
Or if we do need a new one, which seems to be the consensus, how do we partner with the town of Olean or the school to say, maybe we have a shared facility, right? Because I think we can be creative, and not put it all on the city taxpayers,
right?
Or do we need to just fix something up? And I think that a number of the councilmen and the DPW directors have kind of said, we do need a new city garage.
And I think it was like a definitive, like said, and I've had conversations with other aldermen about this, like who comes up with the master plan? Like I know, right? Exactly. Like
right.
The aldermen are like, well, the professionals, and then from what I see, the professionals say, no, we're not elected by the people to make these. You know what I mean? To make these big, huge decisions. Like we're gonna go buy a new house, kids. We're moving the family. Like the kids don't make that decision, but who are the parents? Who are the kids in this situation? Right.
But
like who's running the house?
Plan, right. You have to come with a plan. I always said I never went to my executive director or anything with a problem that I didn't have solutions for,
or at least at least hey, I want to head in this direction to start coming up with solutions.
Yeah.
Can you give me a little guidance to let me know if this is something you want me to work on?
Absolutely. Or I would say to them, here's everything I have, help me triage, because here's where I'm at. But not, and so when I would say, where's that going to come from in terms of funding? Because you're looking at your budget every day. I'm not.
Sure.
Right? I have a snapshot, but I don't know, did it cost you $10,000 more for chemicals? Because I'm not getting that. And so where is it going to come from? Where do you think you have dollars from? And I think the same thing. I think the DPW director's job is to come and say, look, I have evaluated, and this is where our deficiencies are. And then the council's job is to say, well, okay, where do we have money, or where might we need to borrow money to be able to do that?
Sure.
But you come and you say, here's if I got 62 leaks, what's the one that's going to cause me the most difficulty, right?
Right.
And then you come to us and we say, okay, great, but what's your long-term plan for the fix?
Right.
Right? That's what I think I'm looking for.
And I know that, what is it, community development puts together the 25-year plan.
Yeah.
But I don't think they talk about facilities in there. They may.
Yeah, I think there's a little bit, but I mean,
I've never read it. I know that it exists. I know, like, it seemed like when I was on the council, like, we never talked about it. We always talked about doing it. And then after I left, I saw that it got done.
Yeah.
And then it got approved. And it's like, well, but what happens when you need to make adjustments?
Yeah, so I think that, you need to have this roadmap, and that's what I see it as. It's like a roadmap. And it should include things like, how do we bring people into the city? Because that's kind of my thing. I remember when I was younger that it was 20-some thousand,
right.
And now, I think we're squeaking by on
like
being
12,
able to call
maybe?
ourselves a city, right? And so, I think, how do we attract people? And that needs to be part of that 25-year plan, or
Sure.
how do we attract people? Because if I can live anywhere, why would I want to live in Olean, right? Well, there's lots of reasons. I mean, weather, climate, a variety of things.
Sure.
Yeah. I mean,
it
we
can
have
be cold,
water.
but we get 4 seasons.
But
the summers
we don't
are
have
nice.
some of the crazy weather, right? So we live in kind of this haven where we're not having some of those weather events that other people are, and I think people are looking for that. And we have, I hear people complain about crime, but overall we have a safe community.
Right. Yeah, I wouldn't let the Facebook memes get to you.
Yeah, and we do have a safe community, and we have a community that does look out for each other, no matter what people say. I have no doubt if something was going on for me and I knocked on somebody's door, I think that the majority of people would help, right? Or
right.
They would see what they can do. And so I'm like, how, so one of the things I had gone, when I first was on an alderman, I went to our chamber and I said, hey, how can we get a different sign when we come into Olean that kind of says, like, here's our event, like when you go into Elkiville.
Right.
And I said, how do we get signs on 86? Because there's a sign on 86 going into Allegheny that tells you there's a McDonald's. Well, McDonald's is in Olean, but Olean has no sign that says that.
Yes, you got to get off at Allegheny, drive through their town.
So I would like to, and so, I talked about this, and then I know Alderman Robinson brought it up, but I said, how do we get signs on 86?
Right.
And so,
you guys are going to use some of the bed tax money for that, right?
Right, we can. Community development, because my understanding from doing some research is we're responsible for the signs and the maintenance of the signs. But I talked to a number of the downtown
kind of like the Adopt
businesses.
a Highway program.
Yeah. And they're like, yeah, and I think, like, wouldn't it be cool? Because I go through other places and I see small diners that are listed on there. Wouldn't it be cool if we had one for our downtown district that just had some of the different businesses that are on there, and another one that had some of our restaurants on it? Because now, why would anyone stop?
Sure.
Right? I mean, when I'm
and
traveling,
if you're a restaurant, that's good advertising.
Yeah.
Who's not going to pull off to see the beef and barrel?
Right.
Like, not just the corporate Burger King, McDonald's, Subway.
And that's kind of where I've been with it, because I go and if I don't know what's there, I'm not getting off an exit just
Sure.
to get off an exit. I also think we have an opportunity with electric vehicles to get a pin on the map that says, hey, here we have these because I drove a hybrid.
Who updates Google? That's always what I wonder, because, like, you get those, like, when they just finished, like, East State Street.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think somebody would tell the truck drivers? You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
you can't. Where's the truck route?
Yeah.
Well, is it still this way? Can you go? Yes, this way if you go straight. And then so these guys see they're going into a pile of roundabouts, so they turn left, and they've been smoking all those signs right there by the church at State and Barry.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, it just, you know what I mean? Like, that sign, that thing's probably been hit 47 times in like 6 months.
Yeah.
And it's like, but who updates Google? I don't think MapQuest, is MapQuest still around?
Well, MapQuest does come up. When I put maps in for mine, it does come up. But yeah, it's a good point. And how do we market ourselves? Because I think, listen, my husband's from Virginia. We have kids in Georgia and Kentucky, but we chose to live here. We raised our kids here,
right?
And it's, and I go lots of other places, and you do too, I'm sure. And the reality is that, yes, they might have more of X, Y, and Z, but we have a good thing here. We
Right.
do, right?
It's peaceful.
It's peaceful. It's a good place to raise your kids. You know, our kids went to Olean School, and we were blessed with that. You know, the teachers are wonderful. You know, I know there's struggles there right now, and right now the education of itself is really struggling with a number of things. But I think we have good schools. We have good parks. You know, if I were
Everybody knows the teachers. Like, it's a small
Yes.
community.
You know, like one of Michaela's friends, Bethany, shout out to Bethany, because, you know, and who's here and who's teaching now, right? Those are the cool things, and those are the things that excite me, because I see my kids' friends here doing and working and stuff, and we want our kids to stay.
Right.
Right? I don't want my kids to have to go to Buffalo or to Virginia or something to get a job where they can afford to have their own house. You know, we want our kids to stay, and what do? And I know people are like, with the splash park, like, geez, why that? Well, you know what? Here's how I view it. People are going to come from other towns to the splash park, and when they come from other towns, they're going to eat in our restaurants. They're going to go shopping in our businesses. You know, so if we are at a break even with that splash park, kudos to us, because I see it as a draw for the businesses, because our businesses need the city's help to maintain. We don't want to lose more businesses, you know.
Right. You don't want to have your business. I'm a small government guy, so I want police, fire. I mean, I grew up in a town in Connecticut that had volunteer fire.
Mm-hmm.
So it was just, but if you know what I mean, you take the three, and you want level roads for commerce.
Yes.
And nobody wants to come to your shop if every time they come through it's like driving on 86.
Oh, how about that, right? And you know what happened? We asked to say, hey, will you send something to the state saying, look, these roads, nobody wants to stop in Olean. And guess what? We got some
Well, they do,
potholes
because
filled in.
they have to fix their flat.
Well,
Their tie rod broke.
well, and so, but we got some of that going on because, you know, actually Alderman Robinson brought that up, and we all said, hey, can you send a letter to the state just saying, look, we need to have this fixed. This is horrible.
Right.
And so they came out and started fixing things. And, you know, so I think it's like that. What do we need to do? And how, as a council, you know, talking about businesses, and that I looked and I said, you know, when I go through some smaller towns, I think, like, how can we model that here? I see people walking all the time. So I got together with a few of our locally owned businesses, and I said,
I left one of them the other day, and she was like, I gotta go. And she was heading off to your meeting.
right? I said, what can I do? And so I said, well, I can't invite all the businesses because too many, and you just can't get things done.
Right.
So I started with invited 6. And I said, what can we do? You know, what can we do to get more foot traffic? What can we do so not another downtown business closes? And so we brainstormed, and we had 4 businesses moving up to the corner, right? One new that came from Portville, and the other 3 were relocating. Olean Wellness, Kaleidoscope, 2 Sweet Desserts, and Color It Creative, right? So we said, well, you know what? We'll have a Shop the Block event, May 3rd. Everybody come out, Shop the Block. And we're going to say, come see the new businesses. Come visit them. While you're here, come hang out at our other businesses.
Sure.
We're going to have a raffle. And I want to tell you, we are so blessed to have the businesses that are hometown businesses, that when you go to them and you say, look, this is what I want to do, you know, every business I went to was like, yeah, we'll give you a gift certificate for that. You know,
Right.
we'll give you something for that. So I'm going to have this great basket that is still in the works, but every business I went to said they would donate to it, give me a gift certificate or something. And by the time I'm done, this basket's going to be worth hundreds of dollars that somebody is going to win. And if you go to each one of the new shops, the 4 new shops, you get 4 chances to win.
Right.
You know, how fun is that? Those, you know, and then working with another, shout out to Beat City and Connie for creative ideas she has, and I won't steal her thunder about it, to do something else that's going to bring some really cool things into downtown for that. And so this won't be our last event. You know, we'll look to, you know, I said we might have an oldies day or an oldies night where, you know, because businesses were like, hey, we've been here 10 years. We've been here 33. yeah, let's do something for them too. And how do we create more buzz about it?
Right.
And I try to go around once a week. I was a little slack in the winter and go to different businesses and introduce myself and or remind them who I am, right? And then take pictures and I post it up on my alderman site. I post it up on my site to say, hey, you know, um, I just went to Color It Creative. They have so many cool things in there. But I went into 3 stores last week, posted up pictures, and sometimes if it's the employees, not the store owner, they might not know who I am, and they're kind of like, because I'm like, hey, I want to take some pictures, and they're like, well, let me call and see.
Right.
You know?
Restaurants are usually that way. Like,
Yeah,
the
and I'm
health
like,
department.
I won't get pictures. Yeah, right. I have to reassure them I'm not. This is just
The alcohol board. They're pretty bad. I was gonna say I lived in San Antonio, Texas for about 8 months. And one of the cool things about working down at the end of the Riverwalk.
Oh, love the Riverwalk.
Right. So at the end of it, they have the Blue Star Complex. And they have, it's been forever since I've been down there. It's been over 10 years. Almost 15. Anyways, there was, Joey Villarreal he owns Joey Blues, which is a little like, because of the way their liquor licenses are set up, he had to own this little liquor shop, and then he had a brew pub. So you could brew on site, and that was one of the restaurants that I worked at. I tried to get my foot in the door doing brewing, and cool. Bartending, waiting tables, stuff like that, working in the kitchen, brushing up on my Spanish.
Yeah.
But those guys were awesome, and they did, it was called First Friday. It's the first Friday of every month. The entire complex, it was this big parking lot with an L shape, and then people within like 6 blocks. They had all these little diners, and they had these ice houses, which an ice house in Texas is just a vacant lot with a trailer on it, and then they put down wood chips or gravel, and they set up picnic benches and usually a stage, and the trailer is usually outfitted to either to cook with beer coolers in it, and so you can just kind of like sling mini tacos and hand out beers. Obviously people are paying for it, but they're gonna sit down and they're gonna like, you come in, it's all gated off with a little picket fence, and you just come in and it's like, cool, I just went shopping down the road at the new, where they had an art gallery in the complex, and the downside is like Texas is like, they're strict on their booze laws, but not as strict as New York. And so it kind of made it like exciting, because you were able to like kind of like, you could walk out of the ice house and walk down the street, finish your beer. They had trash receptacles on every corner, so you could throw it in, and then go to Joey Blues, or you could, and then they would always have a band in the parking lot. Joey would always pay for the band, and it would sit in the parking lot, so he didn't have to like waste table spots, and we were booked. People were making reservations like a month in advance, like.
Well, and I don't want to steal it, but
Sure.
We are looking to model something after First Friday, because First Friday is actually the title that we're.
Oh, okay.
So yeah, so isn't that funny? Like, right? So I'm
I
excited.
may have said something to Colleen over the years about like my time in Texas, and
right?
maybe because
So-
she's right next to that vacant.
Yeah.
Little, we call it, what is it, a bucktooth is what they call those little lots that
Yeah.
are. And like I always told her, I was like, it'd be phenomenal if you bought this and turned it into an ice house.
Well, we have, and Connie came up with this super cool idea, and we've been meeting, and so I'm not going to steal her thunder
Sure.
on it, because I respect her coming up with it and being passionate about it, and being passionate about, those are the things I'm passionate about. How do we keep what we have? How do we enhance what we have? And ultimately everybody wins, right?
Because if you don't want it, and like maybe you're an introvert, right? You'd rather just stay in your house. It's like, okay, great, you can stay in your house, you can choose to do that.
Yeah.
But if you want something to do, there's something going on.
Yeah, because we want to. And I think people don't realize that. People say to me all the time, I don't think they realize that Walmart's in Allegheny, and so the tax money doesn't come to Olean,
Right.
So how do we take our businesses? Because ultimately the tax money.
I can't remember who I was talking to recently, within the last few days, was telling me that it was because of older councils. They blocked Walmart from going in where the Applebee's and Walmart from where they were going to go in. Walmart was going to go into the mall, and then eventually they were going to go in where the down over by where the Hampton is, by Dresser.
Oh yeah.
Was it Jack Norton Drive or I'm screwing up the name on it, but
It's something like that.
Right. So they were gonna go there, and they kept blocking them. So finally, they said, "Screw it." Allegheny took them.
Yeah,
And
right. So people think all the time that, people say to me all the time, I don't think people realize that, that Allegheny, that we don't get the taxes from there, right? And so if we can shop local, flowers, we have beautiful flower shops. Two Sweet Desserts bought flowers from
who's right next to
Uptown Florist.
Uptown Florist, okay.
And 2.5 weeks later, those flowers look just as fresh as they did. Tell me you can get that at a Walmart. You can't.
No.
You take it home, your roses look like after a couple of days.
Sometimes hours.
Sometimes hours, right?
But, because they've been shipped in from China or wherever they're growing the flowers.
And they've kind of sat there for X number, and they're not getting water, right?
And they're getting sprayed.
Yeah.
Like, have you ever seen, so I'm not a big fan of how, supermarkets do this, but they have to stay competitive.
Yeah.
Right? Is they send fruits and vegetables, unripe. And then they have, ripening agents, whether it's CO2 or it's another chemical that breaks down, so by the time you eat it, it's not, harmful.
Yeah.
Just like Roundup, they said that wasn't harmful, but you never know, right? So you go down these rabbit holes, but the problem is they got to ship you the food, and then you've got to ripen it, and you have to have food ripeners and all this stuff, and that's what Walmart's doing. They're shipping in flowers from. Yeah. They could be coming in from the Middle East. They could be coming in, you know what I mean, wherever.
Somewhere.
Yeah, somewhere. They're flash frozen and sent in, and then they're sprayed with a chemical to stay alive for at least 3 days. So.
And listen, I love me some Walmart desserts, but they're frozen, right? But we have Reed's, not Reed's. We have the Food Barn, the Olean Food Barn, and we have Park and Shop. Jim Mahar, kudos to him for taking on that project, right?
He's the last holdout. He's the last
we
Park
have
and Shop.
Very cool things that we have businesses here that we need to frequent because people say, oh, the businesses are leaving. Well, visit them, shop in them.
Yeah.
Right? If you don't want them to leave, shop in them. Because the downtown businesses, they'll tell you, I am in a couple of them every week. We have an arts council that is so cool, right? You want to learn to make pottery. I love pottery. I'm not so good at making it, but go there, right? They have cool artisans. We have so much talent.
Right.
So much talent, right?
Yeah.
I mean, and we have people, honestly, I have to tell you, the first podcast I watched of yours was the one where you were talking about the mayor and what the mayor does and the councilman. People need to tune in more because honestly, you have a wealth of information.
Thanks.
You do, right? I listened to you talking about Amy and all those things, and yeah, it's a rabbit hole, but man, you know a lot of different things about different things.
You're right. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. That's.
And you own a business, right? Utilize our local businesses.
Oh yeah, and I had a storefront business. I had that coffee shop for a while, and that, man, you have to sling a lot of coffees. And people are like, "Oh, you have to compete with Tim Hortons." I'm like, only because people are so impatient to get their coffee that they have to go in line. But then they don't have a problem going to Tim Hortons
and stay 16 deep in
16
waiting.
Deep, and you wait. Man, how many of those people lose their jobs because they're waiting at Tim Hortons? I would think if you get there and you're running late, or even if you're just on time for work, you're like, I'll be on time. I might stop for coffee. I'm a half an hour late for work. How do you,
yeah.
I just...
and we had great sandwiches because you had great sandwiches there, Martin and I had gone there. We had great sandwiches. But yeah, if you want our business,
I got stuck in the kitchen for the last year of there. So I was
you're like, nah, I'm done.
I didn't mind it. It's just, it was I was when you own a business, you're you will clean the grease trap.
Yes.
You will work in the kitchen. You don't want to. I would rather have been doing the accounting for it and cashing out the drawer or dealing and talking with the customers and waiting the tables. But, sometimes you got to do it. And I was just it felt like the last year I was there, I was just making egg sandwiches and just doing everything we had to do.
Well, yeah, and so kudos to our businesses, Green Acres and Home Plate and those that, they're there and they're there every day because I think running a business is so hard and so much work.
Right.
And, sometimes with little payout. And so, I go to the different businesses and, you want to find something cool. Go down to the paper factory. I mean, they've been there 33 years. I mean, that's very cool. Where we look at Skin Deep that, all of our cool businesses, go in and look at them, go meet them and chat with them. Use our local contractors. What we have and we have beautiful things. We are, when I say this, we truly are blessed. My husband and I, we have 5 kids and our variety of ages, right? And our last is up in Depew now, and
Which one worked? Which one worked at Home Depot?
Marzia.
Okay.
And Marzia is here in Olean with us, and we just we had such good teachers. If I were to give a shout out, Randy Samuelson is amazing.
Okay.
He really helped us with,
I just brought him up today.
Did you?
We were talking about just all the different people you see running around town, right? Like you have Bill Gilroy and his wife.
Yep.
I don't know if she runs anymore. I don't see her as often. I see Bill because he's retired, but I don't see her. But they would always run independently.
Yeah.
And then like you always have the Samuelsons. They're always
Biking.
biking or walking, and sometimes you see them together, sometimes you see them apart.
Yep.
Yeah, they're
and I always tell people, we were so blessed to have Randy as my 2 youngest kids' teachers, one of their teachers, because he was so helpful in so many ways and in helping us be able to manage a couple of things. And those are the things that make me a little sappy and teary, but those are the things that I want other people to see are truly our treasures.
right. Sure, because people are getting their first impression off of Facebook.
Yeah,
And that is depressing because Facebook will drive you down like a real bad rabbit hole. Like,
and I think of it as, I've come to think of it, and I had to learn this a little bit of the hard lesson with like Oak Hill Park and the dog park, is I was listening to the vocal minority.
right.
Is what I call it. The people, and didn't realize, just kind of getting into government and politics, that that was a vocal minority. It wasn't the voice of everybody.
Sure. And people used to criticize the mayor over that because he would quote, because it's a Nixon quote, right? Richard Nixon used to say, like, I listen to the silent majority. And so, and he used that at like some of the different meetings over the years, and people always criticize him. Oh, you right winger, and it's like, no, because that's an actual statement. Like, just because a right winger says it, or a left person on the left, or somebody in the middle, it doesn't mean it's that type of statement. It's literally a truth. Like, because if you look at voters, how many people vote? 15% of the population, maybe.
And
like,
with that, with politics in the town. Honestly, it doesn't matter if you're Republican. It doesn't matter if you're Democrat. It doesn't matter if you're independent. There are 7 of us, and we need to do the best for our city as we can as a council. And at the end of the day, we all like each other. We're going to go to the Beef and Barrel, or we're going to talk as we walk out.
Sure.
It doesn't matter, and politics at that point is really,
because you got to see these people the next week.
Yeah, and
I remember getting into drag out screaming matches during my I think it was my second budget season. I remember walking out of there like Kelly Andriano yelling at me over something, and then like we walked out of there, and like within 20 minutes, like I was like, was I angry? I don't even like, because you get so intense. Sometimes they do get intense, and then you walk out and you're like, and then the next day, you come in for another, because we had like backed up. Sometimes like there was some years that it was like 6 days a week.
Yep. And we come out, and at the end of the time, we all respect each other. And it's not like, oh, JR is Republican, and it's nothing like that. It's rather, hey, look, and listen, I have
JR's a little on the harsh side.
Well, but here's the deal. You always know where you stand.
Right.
There's no question about it.
And you need that sometimes.
Right?
And it takes all types to,
and there is not an alder person on that is not passionate about wanting to see the city succeed. And, and we all have our pieces that we're more passionate about, and, and John is a numbers guy, and keeps, because I don't think people otherwise would understand. Like, there's 76% of the budget is salaries and fringe.
Right.
That doesn't, go into a business and take 76% and just put it over here. What do you?
And I've talked to John about that too, because it's like, and I talked about it on yesterday morning's podcast, was you have half of your. I used to think it was 25%. John corrected me. It's roughly half of the budget is property taxes from the general fund. So cut your water and sewer out.
Right.
So like out of money you bring in for the general fund, half of it is property taxes.
Yeah,
so
about 9,000, I think.
Yeah, right, or 9 million.
9 million.
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah, yeah. So if you have
I
to,
forgot some zeros.
if you bring it in and you're like, I've got to cover 2.5% for inflation over the whole budget in order to raise to meet inflation on a yearly basis,
Yep.
you need to bring in 5% as an increase.
Yeah.
To and the tax cap's at 2%, and so like that's what everyone is griping about it, and it's like, I've talked to John about this. I said, John, you know what? You're gonna shoot yourself in the foot, but you're gonna have to try to bite the bullet and do a 10 or 15% increase this year or the year after, or do larger than 6%, and then you're gonna have to cut back some spending. Like you're gonna have to find spots. It's gonna have to be both.
And we've looked to do that. You know, I think that we've
I know Dave is
questioned-
cringing watching this, by the way, because Dave, if you raise Dave's garbage stickers by like 10 cents, I know he
Well, and
skips a
you
beat.
know, I think his focus is on a certain population and being mindful of that, and on the other hand, I'm aware that we need to be able to take care of what we have.
Sure.
You know, and I'll give you an example. You know, our police budget is, I think, about 4.7 million. I think our
Fires 5.5.
fires no,
6?
I think it's 4.3. I
Is
think.
it? Okay.
Um,
I could have sworn
but
they're 6 and 6 apiece. I
they're
think,
pretty
or together.
comparable. Yeah.
They used
So-
to be.
But here's the deal. You know, I was with a patient and honestly thought he had a stroke. You know, I waited 30 minutes with him before by the way, let me preface this by saying I have the greatest respect for volunteer fire departments. No one can work harder and be more just more altruistic, quite honestly, than volunteer fire departments. But I waited 30 minutes, and all I could think of is, oh my God, thank God he didn't have a heart attack. Thank God that he was breathing, right? Because I waited 30 minutes while waiting for, in another town, not in our town, look, if in 2 or 3 minutes they would have been there, right? But I waited almost 30 minutes because volunteer fire departments have to get everybody together. People have to leave their jobs, and
Sure,
I
they get
have
the pagers out. Yeah, I grew up in a town in Connecticut that we were volunteer.
such great respect. But man, I'm a nurse and I'm stressed because I was waiting almost 30 minutes.
So the only thing I do point out to that is like, because police officers are also like in these emergency situations, right?
Mhm.
It's not fire, but it might be a domestic violence.
Yeah.
Which you would think that more like medical emergencies would happen, or just as frequently happen on duty as a police officer as in a fire situation where there's smoke inhalation, things like that. And it's kind of, and this is not to like point at anyone or point at problems, it's just to show that like the evolution, right? The police department kind of evolved. They didn't really evolve towards in the direction of becoming doctors, but that the fire divisions seem to all become, as if you meet a firefighter, a lot of them are EMTs, a lot of them are like, sometimes they go back to school to become an actual doctor or a nurse or whatever. But there's a lot of this medical training that is kind of like grown out of the fire industry, and not so much in the police. And I always thought that was like, because you could reverse the roles. You could say, well, like this is, you know, Officer Brown and he's an EMT. You know, like, why does he have to be an EMT? Oh, why does the firefighter have to be an EMT?
Yeah.
So it's, you know, it's one of those things. So like, but then you would also be waiting for one of the private ambulance services to show up too. So
Right. So I truly appreciate and I have great respect for the services we have, and at the same time saying, how do we be more efficient with them, right?
Right.
You know,
because people have a tendency to get a little emotional when you start talking about their paychecks.
Right.
Yeah.
So, you know, we look at, and you know, how many calls we get. Well, if the ambulance goes out, the fire truck goes out.
Right.
Right. How do we maybe be more efficient with that? Because I'm going to bet that it costs a pretty penny to take the fire truck out.
Right.
Right. Like gas is not cheap. Right.
Right. And I don't know. I guess I don't know their contract like that. So I don't know.
So we look at that, and I think we have to look at, right? If our largest percentage then is that, how do we look at that? And we've said from the beginning, I've said, how do we be more efficient? You know, instead of, if somebody retires, just replacing them, let's look and see, do we need that job?
Right.
Right? Or can it be consolidated? So I'm not saying, hey, get rid of Jimmy or Johnny or anyone. I'm saying, you know, how do we, you know, at my job, we would do time studies,
Right.
and say, okay, how much of your time is allocated to this? How much is allocated to that? And maybe we do need that position, but when that person retired, that was the time to look at it and
Right.
say, do we need it?
Do we need it? Right.
Right? Because if we know 70,
You don't want to do it while someone's there. You're gonna have a lot more resistance.
Right? But we have people retire. We have people leave. Let's look at it and see if we really need it. Because here's the deal: there are positions that aren't going to be filled in fire and in the police department, because if we filled those positions, we would be probably 12%, right?
Right.
10% at least. And so what we've said is, well, how about if we know people are getting ready to retire, or we know people are going to make a lateral move or something, can we start the new person
Right.
a couple months before and have a transition phase? And can we pay them a training salary versus bringing them right in at where the starting salary is? So I think there's some
Right,
ways
is a
to
full
be,
fledged, they're fully trained.
because
Like,
because you got to go to training, you got to
right.
do X
I have
and
that
Y.
with we call them grunts, right? They come in and like they might know a little electrical, they might know a little plumbing, they might know a little HVAC.
Yeah.
They can pick up something, they can carry parts, they can run to the store, they have a driver's license. And that's pretty much most of them though. Like most of them, like they can turn a screwdriver and they can drive to the store. But it's like they don't make what a technician makes, because a technician has years of experience, they can diagnose stuff. You know what I mean? Sometimes everybody needs a hand, right? Everyone needs to call tech support,
Mhm.
which is, it's one of those.
But if I'm going to pay for your training,
Right.
maybe then you start out at this lower salary. So I think that there is some ways, and that's one of the things we've asked the mayor to do, is to look at positions, particularly by attrition. Do we need them? And then if we're going to have, people coming on and they're going to go into the fire department and they're going to have X number of weeks or months training.
Right.
Can we start them at a salary that's not step one, so to speak? You know what I mean?
Right. Yeah. It's
Because
any career is
then
gonna
we
be
can have
tough to
that
learn.
transition period where we're not going without a fireman, because we know that Jimmy's retiring in July, but we can start somebody now so that come July they're ready.
And it's not so cumbersome to the budget, because
Yes.
Yeah.
Because I think there's
Because now you've
creative
got two
ways.
people making the same, or well, not
Yeah.
the same, but similar.
Yeah. Right?
Yeah.
Because I think we can be creative that way.
Yeah.
Right? And I just think it takes some thought, because I go back to, there's no comprehensive plan for like vehicles and vehicle replacement. Like there's no comprehensive plan for the parks, right? We know that we need to do these things, but we should be having a 5-year plan within the overall comprehensive plan.
Right. And
Because
so
I
having
think we would
having those
save money.
conversations though, I think those conversations need to be had, because I think there is a miscommunication. Like who
Yeah.
develops it, right?
Yeah.
Like the 25-year plan talks about where only wants to be in the
Yeah.
future. It doesn't
Yeah.
talk about where they're moving the city garage in the future.
Yeah.
It doesn't talk about what's going on with the airport in the future. It doesn't talk about water like infrastructure replacement.
Mm-hmm.
And that's always one of those things, right? Like we got all this money to go down West State Street because our goal is to touch the infrastructure.
Yes.
But like every other project that happens with the city, like when North Union Street was being done, I think I got on there in the tail end of it. Like they were just cutting the ribbon the year I got there. But it was like the entire purpose of the project was to take and redo all of the infrastructure. And it's like all this, like there's spots where they didn't have the money, where they tried to cut things out, and now this project had very minimal infrastructure. And it's like, well, that was the entire reason. Like beauty was an added touch. It was like a hey, thumbs up, but the infrastructure is more important. And they kind of like lined a couple sewers, got people by, and then did the beautification. It was like, and it still ran over budget. And it was like, but you missed, and it like you missed the plane. You know what I mean? Like
so that's where we had put a PL through recently that said the infrastructure won't be touched on the project. If we have to cut, it's going to cut from someplace else. It's not going to cut from the infrastructure, because that's the problem. People all the time are like, we need to work on the infrastructure, and then when we talk about the West State project, people are like, well, why do you got? Well, here's the deal. We can't take the West State project money and fix the sewer, because people don't quite get that you can't do that. That's because that's not what that money is for, and the state's not going to give you that money for that.
The state gave it to you for beautification,
or they gave it to you to do this. And part of the reason we got this project is because we demonstrated how is it going to increase pedestrian and motor vehicle safety. And no matter what anybody likes to think, if you look through the United States and you look at the research, it says what increases it? Roundabouts increase driver safety and pedestrian safety, and bump outs. And by the way, I hate bump outs. Absolutely hate them. But do I understand?
Yeah.
I understand why. It decreases the space between where people have to walk.
Curb diet. Yeah, you give it a road diet, and people go slower. If you have widened streets, people go faster, and then I get it.
So I get it, and I get why people are like, well, why do we have to have it? Because
and DOT has to sign off on every road project.
Yeah, and you have to show how are you going to improve something. If I wrote a grant for a homeless program, not for the city, mind you, in my previous job, so I want people saying like, because before I know it, people will be like, oh, Sonya's bringing all the homeless in.
Right.
No, Sonya's not. We have homeless, but we're trying to make better. But in my past job, when I would do that, is you had to demonstrate, if I have this program, what's the improvement? What are the goals? What's going to be better because of it? And and so that's what West State has to say is, how is it going to improve driver safety, pedestrian safety? Yes, we're going to get our sewer pipes done, and that's what we want, because no one wants $20 million attached onto the city's budget, or us to go and get a band for $20 million that's going to cost us a gazillion in interest. This is a way to get what we need.
Sure, and they're paying because you got to open it anyway. So now you got to put it back together. So how can you put it back together?
Yeah.
And it's like, okay, well, this state funding is for this, but at least it allows us to put the tarp on it.
Yes,
you know what I mean? It puts the final cover on it.
And so I think part of it is, again, about education and helping people to understand that we can't take money that the state gave us, or the federal government or whatever, for a road project and put it on the sewer. Right. And we can't, take this money and move it there, because that's not what the grant was for.
Right.
And you have to do certain things. If I wrote, I was actually really pretty successful at grant writing, but if I wrote a grant and I didn't put in there something new or innovative, I didn't get it. Right? If I didn't show how I'm going to improve people's lives and stuff, I didn't get it.
Sure.
Right?
Yeah.
So I think that we can do a better job of just educating people too. So I try to put some things on my website, and even at the meeting. And I want to say, I appreciate everybody who's come out, who's been passionate. It's not always easy to hear, as you probably sat on the other side. It's not easy to hear. And, and social media is its own animal in terms of things. But educating people to say, look, when you come in and we don't say anything, it's not because we don't care. It's not because we're not listening. It's because that's the public's time to talk. It's not a dialogue, and I think that's hard for people because. And
then if you conversate with one person, now you've got to conversate with everybody, and these meetings have a deadline. Like, no one to a degree. You don't want to be there till.
Yeah, and it's not ours to tell people, you're right or wrong, or that. It's ours to listen, and then to take that information and see what we can do.
And compile it with everybody else's information, because you might get 20 emails for every one speaker.
Yeah. And an example is North 12th Street, right? There was a proposal to make it non-parking on North 12th Street between like 7 a.m. and 4 o'clock or whatever it was.
Right.
Well, guess what? A number of residents came and said, hey, look, it's not the whole street that's an issue. It's this corner.
It's this block.
It's this, yes. And guess what?
It's always been that block.
Right? And we adjusted it because there's trucks that park right on that corner that make it difficult for everybody.
Yeah, that commercial business being there. But it's always been. It was a grocery store back in the day. Maybe it was a pet shop, I think. Like it was. It's been a series of commercial things, and it's like, it's just I would never want to buy that as a commercial business building, because it's just, there's no parking.
Yeah,
and I have a tendency to buy buildings that have no parking. I'm a glutton for punishment when it comes to that.
So we talked to them, and we listened, And we adjusted the PL, and now it's only the second block, you know?
Right.
So, you know, we do try. I don't think there's a councilman, and people I think don't realize, we all, with the exception of Dave, who's retired, and he did his time working as a state employee, the rest of us all work full time
Sure.
or work full time plus, right?
Right.
And so we all have jobs, and so we're doing the city's business. So when people call me, sometimes I have to say, like, you know, I'm just walking into a patient's house. You know, can I get your number? Can I call you back?
Right. I used to take, the missus would get angry with me because I would take. There's a reluctant constituent named Tony who lives on 6th Street. And if you know Tony.
Yes, I do.
Tony would call me at least once a week for 45 minutes every night, like every time he called. It was consistent. After I wasn't the alderman anymore, he called me a couple more times, and then it kind of fell off. I'm guessing he calls you now.
Well, I go around, and when I talk to people, there's some that, you know, it just takes longer because they have things that they want to talk about, and sometimes it's things that they really like.
Right.
You know, and sometimes it's things that the council can do nothing about, you
Sure.
know? But if
They just want to be
it's
heard.
not, yeah. And I'll, you know, and if it's not, listen, I'll still shoot an email out, you know,
Right.
and say, hey, look, this, you know, this came up, or, you know, is this something we can talk about? Or if I don't know, I'll ask the other alderman if it's ever come up.
Right.
Because sometimes I'm like, has anyone ever brought this up before? You know, or because I'll say, geez, nobody's ever said that to me before. So let me go see if it's ever been an issue before.
Right.
You know?
And, I say, poor John. I keep thinking of just like going back to the giving people the opportunity to speak at the council meeting and stuff. And it's like, it is their time, but you know, it's also not like, it's not like the school board almost got rid of it a couple years ago, like the public comment, and people think it's like this free speech, and it's a good spot to speak, but you got to think it's still somebody else's meeting. It's still a place to conduct business, and that's where open meetings is. There's where your free speech comes in. You get to watch government happen. And so, like, I think Johnny's been getting a lot of flack because he's trying to maintain order at the meeting.
Yeah.
And I kind of stuck to it, and
I do think we have you to thank for the YouTube, right?
Yeah.
That was your idea.
Because I would set down a 360 camera. I'm probably one of these two tripods here. I would set it down and I would just record it, and there was a big stink at the beginning. It's like, well, we're already on channel 4. It's like, who has cable? Like,
so one of the things I learned, and I knew this, is that, you know, the YouTube channel is definitely thanks to you, and I think that
and then COVID happened, and we had to do something more formal through the city instead of just like one alderman making a public record and publishing it. They did something more formal just because there was a lot of, I couldn't integrate. I mean, I probably could have, but I wasn't kind of donating that much of my finances to because you had all the Zoom people. Everybody was zooming in at the time, and it was there was a whole pile of it. And then I remember I think I was just getting off the council, or I was off the council by the time they switched over to the what do they call it? Broadcast. It's the broadcast box, the pod box.
Oh.
Boxcaster.
Okay.
Yeah, it's the software that they use, and then they bought Sheldon, the mayor's big computer screen and stuff. So, yeah, I mean the transparency is very good. I think that's helping people out. I was watching some town hall meetings from the township of Brighton.
Oh. They've
caught my interest recently, and they're a small township south of, was it Syracuse? Rochester, and they like, for I'm sure their stuff is antiquated, but the way they address it, it's like something from the 90s, but it's really cool. They have a camera on every person plus one in the room.
Oh.
And they have like a microphone and a separate camera. Like they went a little bit, like they go, like, I was kind of watching a couple of their meetings, and I thought that was kind of interesting. So it was one of those, like, there's always room to improve.
And I think Brighton, I was looking, because one of the things I'm mindful of is the safety of everyone. And when we had those issues, part of what I said, I didn't know what was happening behind me. I was just focusing on whatever was going to happen. I wanted to make sure it was as safe as possible. And I was aware there was at least one student in there because we have students that come. And so, we have to make sure that things are safe for everybody who comes. And so I think that we need to rethink how we do things in terms of public comment and that. And still, we are still all of a mind that we want to keep, because not everybody has public comment.
Right.
It's not a requirement.
Right. Like I said, it's not a First Amendment issue you're blocking. Yeah. It's your meeting.
Yeah, but we want people to be able to, and every now and then somebody is like, hey, we appreciate this or that, but I get that it's not what it's for. And, and so I think that, we go back and we look at, if we don't learn from something, it's a lost opportunity.
Sure.
So we go back and we look and we say, well, okay, what could we do differently, right?
Sure.
And if we don't do that, then shame on us, right? But I think that we need to do that, and then we need to say, what do we do and how do we do it to maintain safety and security of everyone?
Sure.
And still give, everybody an opportunity to speak. And I think that's really what we want to do. And yep, we've gotten some flack, and, you have to have a little bit of a thicker skin at times, but sometimes it's hard, because what people don't realize is, we look at bullying, and adults bully too,
Sure.
and the reality is, like, we talk about kids, and it's like 24/7 access. You can be up there in your basement or wherever you are making comments and telling us what blah 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 we are, right?
Right.
And at the end of the day, we still are people too, right? Trying to do the best we can, and I think that's hard. And I tell to people, if you have a specific issue or concern, come to your alderman.
Oh, make the roundabouts go away. That's all I see on social media is make the roundabouts go away, or some issue about something somebody did years ago. And a lot of times it's like, I can't fix that issue.
Right. And I always say,
and then you can't argue with somebody who thinks that you can.
Yep.
Or wants it to go back in time, and they don't want change.
And when I tell people, when I work with patients and they've had things that have not gone right or something, I say to them, you know what, the only thing you can be is a better person tomorrow.
Right.
Right? The only thing I can be is a better counsel person tomorrow. And, and I'll tell you, people have short memories. I would work at the hospital.
No, you wouldn't say.
And I would drive at, maybe midnight, maybe 7 a.m., and to drive from Olean General to my house could take me 10 or more minutes while nobody's on the road.
Right.
In the middle, like midnight or something, to get down the road. And so people forget how long it used to take.
Sure.
I was coming to a meeting and I was 1 minute late, and when I got there, I said to them, if we had roundabouts on West State, I wouldn't have been late, because I hit every red light, you know? Thankfully, they were gracious, but,
Oh, yeah, I remember
forget.
5 o'clock traffic. It was like Strolian. Every Friday was Strolian.
Yeah.
It wasn't Strolian, like you couldn't get out and like go shopping or listen to a band. You were just stuck in traffic for an hour. Or,
and people forget, and they'll say, well, they're backed up. Yeah, they're backed up, but it's moving.
Right.
Moving. It's not at a standstill. I didn't have to wait for 3 lights because there were 6 cars ahead of me.
Right. Yeah.
So I'm appreciative of that, and so I take it with a grain of salt. And I get that not everybody likes the roundabouts. And
there's another. Yeah, you're barking at Dave again. Dave hates the roundabouts.
But I mean,
he represents that demographic very well.
But listen, it's easy. Yield to whoever's in the circle. That's it.
Right.
Right? If there's somebody in the circle, yield to them.
Right.
Don't be thinking like, oh, I got 2 seconds to run out in front of them. No, yield. If somebody's in the circle,
if you can make it, if they're on the other side of the circle and you got plenty of time.
If they're just starting out, absolutely.
Yeah, if you can make it. Some people have a jackrabbit start. You got to look at how the front of their vehicle noses up. Like, there's an art to it. But
right? Or if you're the person that's going to sit waiting while 16 people go.
Or you see them, sometimes, and it's hard to see. You don't see plates on the front of their vehicle. You know, it's from Pennsylvania. And so you get in line waiting for them to go. And then they just wave you through. And you're like, whatever. At this point, I'm not going to argue with them. Like, I know I shouldn't. I should just stand there and hold my ground, like, this isn't the rule, go. And I've thought about that before. And then I've held up traffic because, like,
Yeah.
you can't convince these people to not let you go.
Well, or anyone, or you're like, oh, that was my turn. Well, okay, so bad, so what, Sonya? You're just gonna take it, but yield. You know, if somebody is in there, yield. That's all you have to remember.
Right.
Right? It's like a yield sign there,
Yeah.
and then you're good to go.
Yeah.
You know, and it's made downtown beautiful.
Right.
You know, I mean,
we used to get not editorials. What do you call them? Like those lovely the lovely hate mail letters.
oh, letters to the editor.
Kind of, but they would go to the mayor and then he would distribute them down.
Oh.
So we'd get one and it'd be like mayor and CC council, but they wouldn't CC the council. They would just send it to the mayor, so the mayor would CC the council. And we'd get some from older residents who would, like, you know, old business owners and stuff that are just, you know, they're set in their ways. And you know how many kids you're putting at risk because the roundabout on West State Street, and it's like, what like, where's your, but you can't argue back with these letters because you'd spend more time writing letters back to people, then they might not respond, and then you're like,
And I'm like, call me. You know, we can have a dialogue. I have literally, because I had a patient in Randolph and one in Olean. From Randolph to Olean, with the exception of Limestone, there's that little dead zone. Had to call them back. Had a conversation with a resident because they had a concern.
right?
You know, so in my workday, if I'm driving from Randolph to Olean, absolutely call me. We'll talk about it. If I'm not, and I'm in Olean seeing people, that's not going to happen. But I'll call you back. But yeah, if you got that concern, reach out to your alderman.
Right.
And we're kind of the first line, so to speak.
Right.
Right. Bring
Yeah.
it up, and you know, we've had a number of people, and I've had a number of conversations recently about.
Sometimes you can't fix
things,
everything.
Yeah, and if it's something that I don't think I can, I'm upfront about it. But I'll say to them, look, I don't think there's anything that can be done about this, given where it's at right now. But I will go forward. You know, I'll bring it forward. I'll see what I can do. But yeah, and sometimes people will be like, well, that's not what I was hoping to hear. Listen, I same thing I tell my patients. I'm never going to tell you something that is not manageable or doable. You know, I'd rather up front you know where that is than you're going to just be disappointed. If I say to you, no, and then if I can get it to work,
Sometimes
great,
there's parliamentary things too. Like,
yeah.
I want a no parking sign next to my driveway, and it's like, listen, we don't do that. You know what I mean? But sometimes you get one that it's like, I want a no parking here to corner.
Yeah.
Like, listen, I'll do it. I don't think anybody's going to agree with it, but I'll propose it, and I'll propose it on the floor. And even though you know it's going to die, it's not going to make it out of committee. At least it's in the record. You made the attempt. Listen, I attempted it.
And see, right? Or I have somebody call me who lacks the ability to is really not mobile, and they want a handicap sign in front of their house. It's not manageable because you know what?
Then everybody wants one.
Right.
And then like, what is the determination now? I remember when I was like a kid, you had to be like in a wheelchair. Like, there was a lot more. We're becoming more and more lax. Like, I feel like if you have restless leg syndrome now, you can get a handicap thing for your car. Like, you know what I mean? Where there's people that actually need it.
Yeah, and I think there are some people that it's not readily apparent that they have a disability. You know.
Sure. Like, my aunt has MS. She's in a wheelchair.
Yeah.
Like, she like, if somebody told her she doesn't get one, I'd be like, but the restless leg syndrome guy does. You know what I mean? Like, it's one of those.
And I think, you know, it comes down to doctors and stuff making those determinations. But I think there are some people that you look at and you're like, but we don't know, you know, because some people have horrible pain and really can't walk far, but you wouldn't know to look at them and
right,
stuff.
because they stand so stoically.
You know, and so we can't. So I know that I can't help that person out by putting a handicap parking, because there's lots of places that don't have driveways, you know,
right.
and I'm sorry that you bought a house without a driveway. I'm sorry that you rent a house without a driveway, but that doesn't mean we can put a spot in front for you.
Right, yeah, because what happens when you move? Because people move quicker than signs do.
Yeah, absolutely. Now
right.
I have the sign up, and, you know, and I forget, there's a couple of, we'd always say, I think
the deaf children areas.
Well, Jason would be like, you know, do we need another sign, right?
Right, yeah.
You know, deer, you know, Constitution. Well, but you know what? We know there's deer there, so we should be mindful. Deer aren't paying attention to the sign.
Right, and if you're traveling, if you're not from Olean, you might not know, because I'll look for deer. I'm a hunter, so like, even though they're in the city or something, I'll see them and I'll be like, ooh, okay, there's 3 of them that live there. And, like, it's just
Yeah.
natural, like, because you never know. You'll
Yep.
use that same skill driving down, the back Hinsdale Road.
Coming back from Buffalo, right?
Right.
And
you're
like,
you see them, you know where they are, like.
But they don't pay attention to the sign.
They don't pay attention to the sign, but if you're not from here,
Yeah.
you're not me knowing that there's
Yeah.
a group of 6 deer that live between, right by the bike trail.
26th Street and stuff that they hang out, or
Oh, yeah.
Walmart,
Right, behind Home Depot, or next to the Kubota.
Right. I just drove by somewhere the other day. There were today there were 6 deer in the front yard. I'm like, hey, 6. How cool is that we have deer living here?
Right. Yeah.
Right.
But you should put a sign up. Depending on accidents too. Like, I would say if you know that there's a lot of crossings, you want to put some signs up.
Yeah.
Deaf child area, like, okay, you got like 10 years before the kid. You know what I mean? Like,
and
or
then
20
we need
years.
to take those signs down, because there's still some of those up that I know.
There's no deaf children living in the area.
Yeah.
They've graduated. They've moved somewhere else, and they put a sign up that says deaf adult.
Right. So we need to be mindful, and we've talked about that before.
Because we had some put in. I think I only did one, and Vernon brought it up for his ward, and it was actually like my brother's tenant, and I knew who she was, and she was a county attorney, or an attorney that worked for the county, and she had her grandson come through, and so I knew that, you know what I mean, and I was like, oh, I'll support that. And the house has since sold, and she doesn't live there anymore, but she was there for 5 years, and that's long enough to need a sign.
Yeah, and then we need to be mindful then to
but if
the
every
sign down.
but if every person who's handicapped needed one, like, there's not a lot of deaf and blind kids.
Right. So but we want to be responsive to those that are, but then again, we don't want to put so many signs up that people don't pay attention, because there's a sign everywhere. So where do we need them to go? It's kind of the same
like the
thing.
hawk systems uptown. Those someone is crossing.
Oh.
Those are called the hawk systems, I believe, and they put 2 in. I know Linda Witt wanted like 4 more put in across the city, and it's like you start putting in more of them, people start to disregard them.
Yeah.
And they're very powerful now because there's only 2 of them.
Yeah.
So you know where they are when they go off. Like, it startles you. They don't go off that often, but if they go off all the time, you just ignore them, and that's when people get hit. So.
Yeah, and those are the kinds of things that I think that we try to be attentive to while looking out for both individual residents, but then collectively as the city, right?
Sure.
Because individual need and the collective need can be 2 very different things.
Sure. Right. Yeah. Got anything else?
Well, I saw you looking at your watch. And
it just keeps going off. It just keeps going off. It's don't forget to take your vitamins before bed. The 8 o'clock ones went off. So.
Oh.
But
no, I think, I appreciate this, and I'm always somebody who my husband used to say, how long is that training you're doing? And I'd be like 2 hours, but I got 8 hours of material just in case, right? So I'm always a little bit anxious and over-prepared trying to, but I want to tell you how great this was, right? It was like just a conversation.
Right.
And I want to tell you how much I appreciate that, because you never know. Are you going to be quizzed? So I want to tell you how much I truly appreciate
People were
that.
asking, well, not a problem. People were asking me, because I, like, you got so-and-so on the show? You got Vernon coming on the show? You got Sonya? Amy Sherburne? You going to ask her all these questions? Let me get you questions. And it's funny, because all the people that say they're going to get you questions, they don't get you questions. And it's like, I'm not coming out of left field. I'm not, you know what I mean? I'm not going to, like, have a conversation with somebody and have some, like, real just nasty grill questions like you'd see, like, if you just put one political figure on the opposing side's news network. Like, I was like, no, I want people to be able to come on the show. I want people to be able to watch the show, because you do that once, and then you'll have nobody ever come on your show again. And it's like,
true.
And it's not helpful.
Yeah.
It's not helpful. Like, people keep asking me to get John on the show and ask him what happened at a certain basketball game. And I know that's like, why? Why would I do that? Like.
Yeah, and people, I think sometimes we forget everybody is human.
Right.
Everybody's human. Everybody, and I always say, does anyone want to be judged by their worst moment?
Right.
Right?
Yeah, we've all had them.
Is that how we want to be judged as people? If we have a bad moment, and you know what it is, is you can have this many, and then you have this, and this
is what defines you, and that's what people think.
And that's, any one of us, right? And so I say, so I appreciate that, because you never know, and sometimes people have a set group of questions, but this, honestly, I had listened to Vernon's, I listened to Amy's, I listened to a couple of others, and and I was like, I'm like, oh, it's kind of like a conversation.
That's it.
Right?
Yeah, that's it. Yeah. They could be 10 minutes. They could be 3 hours.
Cool. I told you. I was like, and I thought, and you were, I was like, oh, wait, and then I look at the time clock down there, and I'm like, oh, there's 55 minutes left there on theirs.
I was going to say, yeah, she set the bar high for Bill. That's what I mentioned to her at the last tail end of it. And then she said she wants to do a debate, so that's also kind of like, it'll be interesting. It'll keep things.
And we should have, we should have competition, right? And would it be nice not to, and just kind of, the answer, sure, who wouldn't want to? But at the end of the day, if I've done my job, and I've done my job well enough,
right,
then the people who support me will choose me,
sure,
right? And I still have to get up the next day and go to work regardless, right?
Right.
But I would hope that, and I believe I have, right? I believe I've done a good job. I've represented my residents well. And so I do hope to be able to continue to, be their representative and bring a voice, because I think we're at a time where people don't feel like they have a voice, which is in part why there's so much on social media, I think.
Right.
Because they don't feel like they have a voice.
There's nobody stopping at their house and talking to them.
Yeah.
Which is an unrealistic task.
Yeah.
Like, you can't stop at everybody's house all the time and talk to them and be the other person for them to socially bounce ideas off of. But
yeah, but call her that, and so I'm certainly I had a primary with Ezra in the first one, then with Linda, and certainly running against Linda, I had to be.
Linda Edstrom ran against you last time, didn't she?
Yeah, okay. Right. Linda's a wonderful woman with lots of community resources and connections, and it just forced me to be better, right? It just forced me to learn things and to make sure that I was on point, and so I see that as that. It just encourages me to continue to be the best I can be, and hopefully come the beginning of January, I'll still I'll be in my seat,
right?
Yeah. So thank you.
No problem.
I appreciate it.
Let me, let's, all right, gang. Well, I appreciate you guys watching the show, and I hope this was compelling, and we'll catch you guys tomorrow on Life22. We have a special guest, Kenny Polcari's coming on. Kenny was he's a market strategist. Cool. He's down in Florida, and he was, I think, over 30 years on the stock market and the stock exchange. So he's coming on. He's a friend of mine. I met him through Twitter because I heard him on the news, and I was like, this guy's awesome. And we started a good relationship, and now he's coming on now that we're able to start doing more podcasts and Zoom and stuff like that. And it was a nice little birthday treat. Tomorrow's my birthday, so I get to have my...
Well, happy early birthday. That's cool, though. I will definitely tune in. I probably can't listen to it in the live version, but definitely because